In this video, we'll take a look at low enrolment courses, and in particular break-even analysis. Institutions are taking a serious look at all their programs and courses to determine their financial performance. The typical targets for review are low enrolment courses, but the big question is how low is low? Because some low enrolment courses could still be making a positive margin. So if we take a look at this table here, we can actually see a number of low enrolment courses here are still making a positive margin in the green. Now, before I get too carried away in the video, I'll just explain this term, this EFSL term. It stands for Equivalent Full-Time Student Load, and it's an Australian term. So just to make things easy, if we consider 8 courses make up a full-time load for the year, then one student in one course will be 1/8 or 0.125 EFSL. So in this video, I'll simply multiply EFSL by 8 to get a head count. It's not exactly correct, but it's good enough to give you a feel. So where to from here? What is a low mark that we can set to review courses? So let's have a look at this break-even chart that I've created. Now at the moment, I've just set an arbitrary measure here of 5 EFSL. So looking at everything below that. And we have plotted, it's a scatter plot, where we plot margin against EFSL, and we have a trend line for the margin. And what we're looking for is where that margin goes to 0, and it's a bit hard to see here where it actually crosses over. We can zoom in where we just have a look at those courses that are below 5 EFSL, and we can see that it's around the 1.6 sort of mark. But to undertake this analysis properly, what we want to do is differentiate between fixed and variable costs, as well as direct and overhead costs at a course level. So we'll take a deeper look at this model. First thing we want to do is break the margin into its expense and revenue components, as well as identify the direct expense and overhead expense as shown in this table that has every single course instance for the School of Education, along with its respective EFSL, the faculty expense, which is the direct expense, the revenue, and the non-faculty expense, which is the overhead. Now, unfortunately, we can't perform the next part of the analysis in Power BI, so I'm going to export this data out of the table and import it into a Excel spreadsheet. And to save on time, I've actually prepared this spreadsheet in advance. So all I've done is just imported that exact same data from that table into this spreadsheet. And we can have a look at the total overhead simply by summing up that column. And we can have a look at total EFSL as well by summing up the EFSL column. So taking that data, we can now create that scatter plot of the direct expense down here versus the revenue. Now, one thing we want to do with this revenue line is actually set it so that it goes through 0. So that logically, when we have 0 students, we should also have 0 revenue. Now, what we want to do is now analyze that intercept, so what that break-even point is. So what we can do is pull out of this chart the variable revenue item, the variable direct expense amount, and the fixed direct expense amount as well. And with a little bit of simple mathematics, we can calculate the break-even amount for the direct expense is 0.89 or approximately 7 headcount. But what we also want to do is work out what the fully burdened break-even point is as well. So this is where the overhead and the EFSL come into play. So we can get a overhead per EFSL amount, which we can simply add to the direct expense to fully burden the expense. And again, with some simple mathematics, work out the new break-even point for a fully burdened expense, which is 1.47, or about 12 students in those in the courses. So What does this actually mean? Well, simply any course with less than 7 students should be seriously reviewed because they aren't even covering their direct costs. But the courses with between 7 and 12 students, they're covering their direct costs and contributing towards this $12 million overhead. Now, this is really important to understand because if you remove the courses between 7 and 12 students, then you may save on direct costs, but the fixed overhead remains the same and is simply redistributed over fewer courses, causing each of them to individually need more EFSL to break even. The end result could be that you lose more revenue than you save in expenses. The important thing to remember is that a course that appears to be losing money can still be covering its direct costs and contributing towards some of the overhead, just not all of them. Removing these courses without fully understanding their contribution to the overall school bottom line could actually lead to a worse financial position.